I've been wrestling because I find it so vile and off and odd. I wasn't even sure where to go with it. But I decided that I had to do it because the groups who did this deserve public censure. I learned when I was out in Arizona last week that 2 weeks before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the far-left website Jezebel declared that it had a mission to cast bad luck or a curse on Charlie. They wanted to hurt him in some way. They declared, quote, if the far-right misogynist with a bad haircut wants to villainize independent women, Jezebel is more than happy to be the hag of his nightmares. And they went on to the website Etsy, yes, Etsy, to, quote, cast a curse on him. Yes, this is actually a thing. Etsy, the website known for making arts and crafts on demand, will happily cast a hex through its witches, who you can hire, on someone if you ask them to. The Jezebel crew was delighted to discover, quote, it's not uncommon for the so-called witches on Etsy to channel their energy toward thwarting Republicans. There's even a subreddit devoted to casting nightly hexes on Trump. Jezebel decided Charlie Kirk, who they've repeatedly described as far-right, the founder of the right-wing conspiracy theory factory, Turning Point USA, is, quote, more irritating than most, and asked its audience if they were, quote, interested in punishing Kirk for years of regressive rhetoric with a curse, with a hex on him. After all, they told readers, he's basically a fake news vending machine. The article notably does not list the name of any particular author, but simply uses its company name as the byline. So we don't know exactly which writer or staffer at Jezebel, which has long been a disgusting publication, came up with the idea. But since they're attributing it to all of them, so will we in terms of our blame. It was, in fact, the brainchild of one writer, however, because it is written in the first person, a female. The writer explains now, is it ethical to curse a man I've never met? Probably not. But is it unethical to let him keep talking? Yes. Now comes the obligatory ass-covering paragraph in the piece, just to stave off any negative publicity for Jezebel. Quote, I want to make it clear I'm not calling on dark forces to cause him harm. I just want him to wake up every morning with an inexplicable zit. I want his podcast microphone to malfunction every time he hits record. I want his blue blazers to suddenly all be one size too small. I want one of his socks to always be sliding down his foot. I want his thumb to grow too big to tweet, to ruin his day with the collective feminist power of the Etsy coven would be my life's greatest joy. So even in her ass covering, she was asking for Charlie to be rendered less attractive, to not be able to use his microphone and silence his voice, to have discomfort foisted upon him, to stop his ability to tweet or spread his message, and to, quote, ruin his day. Got it? That's the nice part of the Jezebel article. She tells the reader she placed her first spell on Etsy, and it was, quote, in all caps, make everyone hate him. And she wondered aloud, how long would it take to kick in? The witch servicing Jezebel on Etsy contacted the writer and asked if she would like to, quote, amplify the energetic support of the spell for an extra $50. She did it. She goes on, for the powerful hex spell, I had to provide Kirk's date of birth for accuracy. The witch informed her that she, the witch, had performed the hex and that it was successful. Jezebel wanted to know when they were getting results on their curse. And while their article about all of this it was published on Monday, September 8th, it makes clear that the writer contracted for the curse in late August. She says she wanted it to line up with the new moon in Virgo, which this year meant August 23rd. That tracks because she points out in the piece that by August 24th, she was waiting impatiently for results. The witch, they reveal, promised on August 23rd that, quote, you will see the first results within 2 to 3 weeks. This was 18 days before Charlie was killed. Not satisfied with this curse, the amped up one, alone, Jezebel reached out to a, quote, third witch, Priestess Lilin. Jezebel opined, if enough people cursed a single person, would the results be stronger? Quote, when I asked her if she'd noticed more political figures being targeted these days, she said yes. The next day, Lilin sent the Jezebel writer proof of the hex she had cast. Quote, a photograph in flames, the edges slowly curling inward, engulfing Charlie's ridiculous, scrunched up little face. She whispered, I imagine, writes the Jezebel reporter, trust the unseen. Chills, writes Jezebel. Sunday, August 24th passed, writes the author, and nothing. Monday, August 25th, still nothing. Tuesday, August 26th, nothing. But then she writes, she reminded herself, this is witchcraft, not Amazon. The forces operate on their own schedule. The Jezebel writer ends the piece as follows. So, did my Etsy curses work? Time will tell. The forces move in mysterious ways. And as the priestess Lilin reminded me, spell work is a collaboration between the caster, the client, and the universe itself. For now, we can only trust in the timing of the great unknown. To you, Mr. Kirk, may the rash come swiftly. 2.5 weeks after those curses were requested and cast, 2 days after Jezebel published that article, Charlie was killed by an assassin's bullet. I know what you're thinking. This is a bullshit Etsy curse. Why are we spending time on this? I'm going to get to that in a minute. Stay with me for now. After the shooting, Jezebel took down the article, quote, on the recommendation of our lawyers. They underscored that the piece was meant to be humorous, intended as satire, and that they made clear they wished Charlie, quote, no physical harm, which is not the full story now, is it? At the same time, they said of the article, quote, we stand by every word, which means they did want him cursed. They wanted everyone to hate him. They wanted it to be powerful, and they wanted Charlie, quote, punished for years of regressive rhetoric. They also made clear that taking down the article was, quote, driven by an abundance of caution for our staff. In other words, they were worried about violence against them by Charlie Kirk supporters. They also, they wrote, wished, quote, to avoid the piece being misused in a tense and volatile environment. There was not, they made clear, any change in their editorial and judgment. In fact, they emphasized, quote, we may republish at a later date. They then rambled on about the country's gun problem and the heated political divide in the country and free speech, noting they do not actually condone political violence. Now, again, you may be saying to yourself, why are we talking about Etsy curses? None of this is real. Well, 2 things. First of all, Christians are opposed to casting spells or trying to contact the spirit world, not only because they believe there's only one God, but because they acknowledge the existence of the devil and evil spirits. Here is Father Mike Schmidt. He was on the day Charlie died, helping us through that as well. But he came on our show first time a couple of years ago, and here he is discussing this very subject.
The motivation behind the Ouija board is actually something where I'm trying to contact spirits. And someone could say, well, I'm trying to contact nice spirits or good spirits. And the unfortunate thing we know about is that, yes, when God created angels, he created angels. They're good. They're beautiful. They're in harmony with him. But also we know that a number of those said no to God. A person who's reasonable would say, but I'm just playing. And I would say, I completely understand that. And then I would say, at the same time, you remember the movie The Exorcist?
Of course.
Yeah. How can you forget it? So that story is based off of 2 true stories. And one of the true stories is, I believe, about, if I can get the details right, is about a young man who was at, kind of like a birthday party, some kind of celebration of some sort with kids. And they just busted out the Ouija board and just played for fun. But that was an entry point for what ultimately became a possession.
In other words, you're playing with fire, messing with this stuff. There actually are demons in this world. Calling up the spirit world, in particular the devil's spirit world, can actually have real world consequences. It's not something to mess with. Many Christians believe this. This is dangerous. It's not a game. It's literally evil. Second, this is what I really want you all and the people at Jezebel and Etsy to know. Erica and Charlie Kirk heard about these curses. And that news genuinely rattled Erica in particular. She knew Christian teaching on this subject. She loved Charlie, absolutely. And she was scared when she heard of the curses Jezebel had called up. So much so that she and Charlie contacted a friend who I believe she said was a Catholic priest, but definitely a friend, and asked him to come over and pray with them over Charlie the night before he was murdered. She eventually worked it through, and so did Charlie. That, as she later told me, weapons will form but not prosper. That Satan and those witches have no power. Of course, God's will is the one that matters, and his blessing over Charlie was real and palpable. All you had to do was spend time with Charlie to know that. But why torture a family like this? A Christian, believing family. Why do this vile thing to a young couple, parents to two babies, living in accordance with the gospel, deeply in love, yes, political, but doing nothing other than speaking publicly about their views and their desires to make other people's lives better? Who would do such a vile thing? Jezebel, that's who. And unbelievably, Etsy. And the people behind this evil, they should be called out. That's why I'm talking about it as our lead. They should be called out. Jezebel should be forced to identify the woman who wrote this and did this. Jezebel should close, frankly. It has zero redeeming virtues or value. Etsy should stop this practice immediately and get back to arts and crafts and jewelry. And both entities should issue an immediate, full-throated apology to Erica Kirk for introducing this awfulness into her beautiful family and causing her or Charlie any distress whatsoever in what would be the waning hours of his life.